Okay, let's look at some simple sentences of English involving quantification and how we'll translate those into the formal language of Chapter 5. Here's a little sentence that maybe a materialist philosopher of mind might say, everything is material. In order to translate this sentence into the formal language, we're going to rephrase it in a way which is more long-winded and less natural, but which makes clearer what the parts of the sentence are. Notice this long-winded rephrasing comes in two parts. The left part is a quantifying part, saying that what I'm about to say applies to every object. The other part is the describing part. Here's what I'm about to say of that object, or objects in this case, that it is material. Notice that the pronoun it shows up in both of those parts. That's not a coincidence. There's going to be a semantic link between those two occurrences of it. I tell you, for every object the following holds of it. It, that same object I was just talking about, it is material. We're going to have a formal counterpart to each of these two parts. The quantifying part will be translated as this pair of symbols. We will call this pair of symbols universal quantifier because it talks about every object, all objects. Universal quantifier is made of two parts. That upside down A on the left, we call that the universal quantifier symbol. And that little X on the right is our formal counterpart to the English pronoun it. We're going to call X a variable. Note that the universal quantifier symbol will only ever show up with a variable immediately after it. So universal X together forms a universal quantifier. And then on the right, the little describing part, we'll use a predicate letter, say G, to translate is material. And again, we're using X to stand for that little pronoun it. We noticed before that those two occurrences of it in the English sentence link up. For every object the following holds of it. It, that object, is material. The same will hold in the formal language. The two occurrences of X link up. X is again our formal counterpart to the pronoun it. Universal X, GX, says, for every object, X, the following holds of X. It is G. Next, let's translate a sentence that even a dualist philosopher of mind might agree to. Something is material, making a weaker claim. Again, we're going to rephrase that in a more long-winded but more useful way. For some object, the following holds of it. It is material. Once again, we find this long-winded rephrasing breaking up into two parts. There's a quantifying part. For some object, the following holds of it. We're going to translate that quantifying part by this pair of symbols. This pair of symbols is called the existential quantifier. The first symbol, that backwards E, is the existential quantifier symbol, but it's only ever going to show up with a variable immediately after it. So existential X is an existential quantifier. And again, we're making some claim about that X, in this case, that it is material. Once again, we have two occurrences of it in the English. For some object, the following holds of it. It, that object, is material. And again, we have the same variable occurring twice in the formal translation. X is the formal counterpart to the English pronoun it. And existential X links up with GX, just like the two its do in English. Finally, let's translate a sentence that, say, an idealist philosopher of mind might say, nothing is material. You might think we'd need to introduce a third quantifier here to translate nothing, and we could certainly do that. But we don't really need to, because the claim that nothing is material is basically contradicting the previous sentence that we translated, namely, something is material. Whenever one of those sentences is true, the other one's going to be false. Nothing is material then gets translated as the denial, the negation of the claim that something is material. Nothing is material, translated as tilde existential x gx. Now it turns out that there are other ways we could translate this nothing claim, but that's true of something and everything claims as well. But we've got at least one way of getting this sentence into the formal language of Chapter 5. So we know how to translate some simple quantified sentences of English into the formal language of Chapter 5. Everything is material, universal x gx. Something is material, existential x gx. Nothing is material, tilde existential x gx.